I was the family scapegoat until the truth came out. For as long as I could remember, my family had one person to blame whenever something went wrong. That person was me. My name is Emily Carter, and I grew up believing that maybe I really was the problem. If my younger brother failed a test, Mom said I distracted him. If my sister lost something, somehow I had touched it last. If Dad came home angry after a terrible day at work, everyone quietly looked in my direction as if I had caused it. I was the family scapegoat. And for years I accepted that role because I loved my family more than I loved myself. My parents had 3 children. My older sister, Claire, was the perfect daughter. She was beautiful, confident, popular, and somehow everything she did was impressive. Then there was my younger brother, Ethan. He was the golden child. My parents celebrated everything about him. Every soccer goal, every good grade, every small achievement became a family event. And then there was me. I was the daughter who was expected to understand. The daughter who was told to sacrifice. The daughter who was always asked to apologize. When Claire broke Mom's expensive vase when we were teenagers, Mom immediately asked me why I had left it where Claire could reach it. When Ethan accidentally damaged Dad's car by backing into the garage door, Dad yelled at me because I had supposedly distracted him earlier. I remember standing in the driveway that afternoon while everyone argued. Ethan was crying. Mom was comforting him. Dad was checking the dent in his car. And Claire was standing behind them quietly watching me. Then Dad turned toward me. "Emily, this is your fault too." I stared at him. My fault? I wasn't even in the car. "You knew Ethan was upset today," Dad said. "I didn't know he was driving." "You should have." That was how it always worked. There was always some invisible reason why I was responsible. When I tried to defend myself, I was called selfish. When I stayed quiet, everyone assumed I was guilty. Eventually, I stopped defending myself. I learned that silence was easier. But silence came with a price. It slowly destroyed my confidence. By the time I was 22, I had become the person who apologized even when someone else hurt me. If someone bumped into me, I said sorry. If someone raised their voice, I wondered what I had done wrong. If someone treated me unfairly, I convinced myself they probably had a reason. I didn't realize it then, but my family had trained me to believe that I deserved less. After college, I moved to another city and found a small apartment. For the first time in my life, I had distance from my family. I thought things might improve. And for a while they did. I found a job at a small marketing company. I made friends. I started going to the gym. I even began seeing a therapist because I wanted to understand why I felt guilty all the time. My therapist asked me one question that changed everything. "Emily, when was the last time you did something wrong, and someone simply corrected you without making you feel like a bad person?" I couldn't answer. Because I couldn't remember. Then she asked, "What happens when you say no to your family?" I laughed nervously. "I don't say no." "Why?" "Because they'll be angry." "And what happens when they're angry?" "I apologize." She looked at me quietly. "Why do you think their anger is your responsibility?" That question stayed with me. A few months later, my mother called. "Emily, your father and I need your help." I immediately felt nervous. "What happened?" "We're having some financial problems." I closed my eyes. Of course. Whenever the family needed something, they called me. Mom explained that Dad's business had suffered losses. They needed money to cover some urgent expenses. "How much?" I asked. $20,000. I nearly dropped my phone. "Mom, I don't have $20,000. You have savings." "Not that much. You always say you're responsible with money." "I am, but," she interrupted me. "Your brother needs help too. He's starting his own business." I felt something inside me tighten. "Ethan is starting a business?" "Yes." "How much are you giving him?" There was a pause. "That's not important." "Mom." Another pause. "Your father thinks you should help because you don't have children." I stared at the wall. There it was again. Because I didn't have children. Because I was single. Because I had a stable job. Because I was the one who could sacrifice. I said no. It was the first time I had ever clearly said no to my parents. My mother's voice immediately changed. "Emily, after everything we've done for you? I appreciate everything you've done. Then prove it." "I can't give you $20,000. You've changed." "No, Mom. I'm just saying no. She hung up. That night I cried. Not because I regretted saying no. I cried because I realized how terrified I was of disappointing them. A week later, Claire called. Mom says you're refusing to help the family. I can't afford it. You're being selfish. I'm not responsible for everyone's finances. Claire laughed. You always think you're better than everyone. I never said that. You don't have to say it. Then she hung up. For several days, nobody contacted me. Then something strange happened. Dad called. Emily, come home this weekend. Why? We need to talk. I didn't want to go. But old habits are difficult to break. So I drove home. When I arrived, everyone was there. Mom, Dad, Claire, Ethan. The moment I walked into the living room, I knew something was wrong. Dad was holding a folder. Sit down, he said. I sat. He placed the folder on the table. We've decided to sell Grandma's house. I froze. Grandma's house. My grandmother had died 3 years earlier. Before her death, she had told me something I never forgot. Emily, this house will always be yours. I thought she was simply being sentimental. But Dad continued. Your grandmother left the property to the family. I frowned. Are you sure? Yes. Because she told me she wanted me to have it. Everyone went silent. Then Claire laughed. Grandma said a lot of things. I looked at Dad. Did she leave a will? Of course. Can I see it? Dad hesitated. Just for a second. But I noticed. He finally opened the folder. There is no need to question everything. I just want to see the will. Emily, Mom said. Don't make this difficult. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. I stood up. I want to see Grandma's will. Dad became angry. You've always been suspicious. No. I'm asking a simple question. You think we're stealing from you? I don't know what to think. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Because of your attitude, this family can't have peace. I looked around the room. Claire was staring at her phone. Ethan was avoiding eye contact. Mom looked disappointed. And suddenly I understood something. They weren't surprised by Dad's anger. They were expecting it. I left. That night, I called my grandmother's lawyer. His name was Daniel Brooks. I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral. When I explained what was happening, he became unusually quiet. Then he said something that changed my life. Emily, I was actually hoping you would call. My heart started pounding. Why? Because there are documents your father never collected. What documents? Your grandmother's final estate papers. I could barely breathe. What do they say? I can't discuss everything over the phone. Please. He sighed. Your grandmother left the house to you. I closed my eyes. I knew it. I knew Grandma had meant what she said. But Daniel wasn't finished. She also left you a trust. A trust? Yes. How much? He hesitated. Approximately $400,000. I couldn't speak. $400,000. My grandmother had left me a house and a substantial trust. And my parents had never told me. Why didn't anyone tell me? Daniel's voice became serious. That's something you need to ask your parents. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling. Every memory from my childhood started replaying in my mind. The constant blame. The sacrifices. The money I had given my parents over the years. The way they always said I needed to help the family. The way they treated Claire and Ethan differently. Then I remembered something else. When I was 18, Grandma had told me, one day you're going to discover that you're stronger than you think. At the time I thought she was simply encouraging me. Now I wondered if she knew exactly what was happening. The next morning I drove back to my parents' house. I didn't tell them I knew about the trust. Instead I asked one question. Where is Grandma's will? Dad looked at me. I told you. It's being handled. By whom? Emily, stop. No. The word surprised even me. I looked directly at my father. No, Dad. I'm not stopping. Mom started crying. You've become so cold. No. I've become curious. Claire stood up. You're acting crazy. I turned toward her. Did you know Grandma left me the house? Claire froze. Ethan looked at Dad. That was all the answer I needed. They knew. All of them knew. I looked at my mother. How long? She wiped her tears. We were trying to protect the family. By hiding my inheritance? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Dad finally spoke. Your grandmother didn't trust us. I laughed bitterly. And now I understand why. Nobody answered. Then I said the question that had been haunting me. Why did you always blame me? Mom looked away. Dad remained silent. Claire whispered. Because you could handle it. I turned toward her. What? She looked uncomfortable. You were always stronger. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So because I was stronger, you decided I should carry everyone's blame? Claire started crying. I didn't decide anything. You did. She looked at Ethan, then at our parents, and finally back at me. Mom and Dad were afraid Ethan would fail. I stared at her. What does Ethan have to do with this? Ethan finally spoke. Everything. He looked ashamed. I owe a lot of money. How much? Almost $200,000. I felt sick. From what? My business. What happened? I made bad investments. I looked at my parents. And you wanted my inheritance to pay his debts. Dad didn't answer. That was the truth. For years, they had treated me like the problem because it was easier than admitting they had a favorite. They blamed me because I was the easiest person to blame. They had convinced me that I was selfish whenever I protected myself. They had convinced me that saying no made me a bad daughter. And all the while, they were protecting Ethan from the consequences of his decisions. I left without saying another word. But the story didn't end there. Daniel helped me legally secure the property and trust. I hired an attorney. We discovered that my father had attempted to transfer ownership of Grandma's house without my knowledge. The documents were invalid. The truth came out completely. My parents had known about the inheritance for nearly 3 years. They had used my grandmother's money for family expenses. They had also borrowed money from the trust account before the bank froze it. When the attorney showed me the records, I felt something I never expected. Not anger. Relief. Because for the first time I knew I hadn't imagined everything. I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't been selfish. I hadn't been the problem. I had simply been the person everyone found easiest to sacrifice. The hardest part was accepting that my family might never apologize. And they didn't. My father blamed the lawyer. My mother blamed stress. Claire blamed our childhood. Ethan blamed himself. But nobody looked at me and said, "We're sorry." So I stopped waiting. I moved into Grandma's house. It was old but beautiful. The garden was overgrown. The kitchen needed repairs. The walls were covered in faded photographs. But every room reminded me of her. One afternoon while cleaning the attic, I found an old wooden box. Inside were photographs, letters, and a handwritten note. The note was from Grandma. It said, "Emily, if you're reading this, something has probably happened that made you question your worth. Don't. You were never the difficult child. You were the child who noticed things other people wanted hidden. You were never selfish. You were the one who kept giving even when nobody thanked you. And you were never weak. You were simply surrounded by people who benefited from you believing that you were weak. One day you will understand. When that day comes, choose yourself. Love, Grandma." I read the letter 3 times. Then I cried. But these weren't the same tears I had cried as a child. They were tears of release. For the first time, I wasn't crying because I felt guilty. I was crying because I finally understood my own worth. Months passed. I rebuilt the house. I started my own consulting business. I stopped lending money to people who treated me like an ATM. I learned to say no without explaining myself. And slowly, something incredible happened. I became happy. Not the fake happiness I used to show my family. Real happiness. The kind where you wake up in the morning and don't immediately wonder who might be angry with you. One evening my mother called. I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Emily." "Hi, Mom." There was a long silence. Then she said, "Your father misses you." I looked out the window. I missed the parents I thought I had. She started crying. "Can we fix this?" I thought about it. Maybe. She took a shaky breath. "But things will never be the way they were." "I know. And I won't accept blame for things I didn't do anymore." "I understand. And I won't give money just because you call me family." Another silence. I understand. It wasn't an apology, but it was the beginning of something different. I didn't immediately forgive them. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't something you owe people simply because they're family. Sometimes forgiveness means letting go of the need to make them understand. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means choosing yourself. And sometimes it means giving people another chance only after they prove they've changed. A year later, Ethan visited me. He looked different. More humble. More responsible. He told me he had sold his car, closed his failed business, and started working again. I blamed you for a lot of things, he said. I looked at him. Why? Because Mom and Dad told me you were the reason everyone was stressed. I smiled sadly. They told all of us different versions of the same story. He nodded. I'm sorry. Those 2 words meant more than he probably realized. Not because they erased the past. They didn't. But because someone finally acknowledged it. Claire eventually apologized too. My father took the longest. Almost 2 years. When he finally came to my house, he stood on the porch for several minutes before knocking. When I opened the door, he looked older. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't say anything. I blamed you because I was afraid of admitting that I had failed. My eyes filled with tears. He continued. I thought if I made you responsible, I wouldn't have to admit that Ethan needed to face his own mistakes. I took a breath. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? Because once we started lying, every lie needed another lie. I understood. That was exactly how families like mine became broken. Not because of one giant betrayal, but because of hundreds of small ones. One lie. One excuse. One unfair accusation. One secret. One apology that never came. Until eventually, everyone was trapped inside a story that wasn't true. I didn't forget what happened, but I decided I didn't want to spend the rest of my life carrying it. My family had spent years telling me who I was. Selfish. Difficult. Sensitive. Unreliable. A troublemaker. A burden. But when the truth finally came out, I realized none of those words belonged to me. They belonged to the story my family created, because they needed someone to carry their guilt. And I had spent years believing it. That was the real tragedy. Not the inheritance. Not the lies. Not even the betrayal. The tragedy was that I had almost forgotten how valuable I was. Today I still have Grandma's letter. I keep it framed beside my desk. Whenever I doubt myself, I read it. And I remember the girl I used to be. The girl who apologized for everything. The girl who thought love meant sacrifice. The girl who believed being a good daughter meant allowing people to hurt her. I wish I could go back and tell her something. I wish I could sit beside that frightened little girl and whisper, "You are not the problem. You never were. You don't have to earn love by suffering." And one day the truth will come out. The family scapegoat eventually becomes the family truth teller. And when the truth finally came out, I didn't destroy my family. I simply stopped destroying myself to keep it together. That was my revenge. Not money. Not the house. Not exposing their secrets. My revenge was becoming happy without their permission. And perhaps the greatest lesson I learned was this. Sometimes the person everyone blames isn't the weakest person in the family. Sometimes they're the strongest person in the room. They're simply the one who hasn't realized it yet.